The Stanley Cup Final starts tonight as the Pittsburgh Penguins will try to become the first team in 19 years to repeat as Cup champs against the Nashville Predators, challengers for the first time in their history and the first 16 seed to make it to the final. We'll soon see if one of them can finish with a story that will go down in history. Everyone loves a great story, such as superstars Ray Bourque, Lanny McDonald, and Dave Andreychuk finally taking the ultimate prize at the tail end of their careers, or incredible runs such as Montreal winning 10 overtime games in 1993, or Detroit sweeping both of their series in 1952, allowing just 5 goals in 8 games, none at home. Even the first 3-0 series comeback in sports history happened in the 1942 final when the Maple Leafs stunned the Red Wings. But one of the greatest Stanley Cup stories of them all is one that predates the NHL. An epic journey across Canada just for a chance at greatness. But before we get to that, let's take a look at some early Stanley Cup history. Lord Frederick Arthur Stanley, the 16th Earl of Derby, was appointed the Governor-General of Canada on May 1, 1888, and witnessed his first hockey game in Montreal that year, an Amateur Hockey Association of Canada game featuring the Montreal Victorias and the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association. The Stanley family immediately fell in love with the game, and 2 of his sons, Arthur and Algernon, joined the Ottawa Redu Rebels of the Ontario Hockey Association, which formed in 1890. They played exhibition games against other Ontario-based teams on a rink built on the grounds of the Government House that were as much about social affairs as they were sport. Ottawa won the OHA Championship in 1892, but Lord Stanley could not attend the March 18th banquet. He instead sent a letter that would change hockey and Canadian culture forever. It read, in part, "I have for some time just been thinking that it would be a good thing if there were a Challenge Cup which would be held from year to year by the champion hockey team in the Dominion. There does not appear to be any such outward and visible sign of championship at present, and considering the general interest which the matches now elicit, and the importance of having the game played fairly and under rules generally recognized, I am willing to give a cup which shall be held from year to year by the winning team." He contacted a former aide in London by the name of Captain Charles Colville and allowed him 10 guineas for the commission of a small silver bowl made by the finest silversmith in the city. It was made by G.R. Collis & Company of 130 Regent Street in Sheffield, England, and engraved with Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup on one side and from Stanley of Preston along with the Stanley family crest on the other. It would be ready by 1893, the same year Lord Stanley's 5-year term as Governor-General ended. He would go back to England never to see the trophy that bears his name awarded, but he appointed 2 trustees, P.D. Ross and John Sweetland, to oversee the annual awarding of the cup. In the early days of the trophy, there were 2 ways to win. A team could be the champion of the league in which the cup currently resided, or any team could issue a formal challenge to the current champions, but it was up to the trustees to decide which teams were worthy, as it was stipulated that challenges only come from winners of reputable hockey leagues. It was first awarded in 1893 to the winners of the AHA, which Stanley believed was the top league in Canada. There were 5 teams in the league: the Ottawa Generals, Quebec Hockey Club, Montreal Victorias, Montreal Crystals, and the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association, who won the season with a 7-1 record. The AAA won the cup again the following year, this time in a single-game championship against the Ottawa Capitals after there was a 4-way tie in the regular season standings. The Quebec Hockey Club withdrew from the playoffs, and Ottawa was given a bye to the championship game as the only team in the league not from Montreal. The AAA would beat the Victorias 3-2 and then Ottawa 3-1. Osgoode Hall, the champions of the OHA, issued the first challenge, though it had to be cancelled due to lack of ice. The first successful challenge was when the Winnipeg Victorias, champions of the Manitoba Hockey Association, defeated the Montreal Victorias 2-0 on February 14, 1896. Winnipeg would host the first ever Stanley Cup parade, though they only held the cup until December 30th that same year, when the Montreal Victorias challenged them right back, winning 6-5. The first best-of-3 series was issued in 1897 when the Ottawa Capitals, champions of the Central Canada Hockey Association, challenged the Montreal Victorias, though the series was abandoned after a 15-2 Vicks win in Game 1. The first best-of-3 series to be played out was in 1900 when the Montreal Shamrocks, champions of the Canadian Amateur Hockey League, which replaced the AHA, defeated the Winnipeg Victorias 2-1 in February, and then the Halifax Crescents, champions of the Maritime Hockey League, 2-0 in March. The Stanley Cup would bounce around different leagues until the National Hockey League was formed for the 1917-18 season, where it was won for 7 of the next 9 seasons. It was not awarded in 1919 due to an outbreak of the Spanish influenza, and in 1925 the Victoria Cougars, champions of the Western Canada Hockey League, defeated the Montreal Canadiens 3-1 and would be the last team outside the NHL to win the Stanley Cup. In total, 39 teams from 21 different leagues played in a championship or challenge series for the Stanley Cup, with 17 teams representing 12 different leagues winning it before the NHL became its sole owner in 1926. All of them followed the rule of being a champion of a reputable hockey league except for one, an all-star team picked from the 4 teams of the Dawson City League in the Yukon, known as the Dawson City Nuggets, who challenged the Ottawa Silver Seven in 1905. Dawson City is located 278 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle and 77 miles from the Alaskan border. It was a big part of the 1896 Klondike Gold Rush that turned a First Nations fishing and harvest area into a bustling city of 40,000 by 1898, at which time it began serving as the Yukon's capital. But the gold rush promptly ended and the population fell to just 5,000 by 1904. It was Colonel Joe Boyle who provided the $6,000 to fund the trek. Known as the King of the Klondike, he made his money during the gold rush through mining concessions. He also organized a series of exhibition games to take place after the challenge, as their share of the box office was only expected to be around $2,000. The Nuggets were made of players who headed west for gold before heading back east in search of silver. 2 of them had even played for the Cup previously. Lauren Hannay was a cover point which, along with point, developed into the defense positions we know today. He played the year before when Brandon lost to the Silver Seven 2-0 and joined the team as they passed through Winnipeg. Dr. Randy McLennan hailed from Cornwall, Ontario, and played the position of rover, the one player on each team, usually the best skater, who helped out equally on offense and defense. He was on Queen's University in 1895, who lost to the AAA in a championship game 5-1. They also had center Hector Smith, a minor, and right wing George Kennedy, a civil servant, both from Selkirk, Manitoba. There were 2 post office workers, left winger Norman Watt from Aylmer, Quebec, and point Jim Johnstone from Ottawa. Albert Forrest was a cyclist and speed skater from Trois-Rivières, Quebec, and although he had never played the position before, stood in goal for the Nuggets. Finally, there was substitute Archie Martin, a lacrosse player who worked for Boyle's dredging company. Unfortunately, they went short-handed as 2 of their best players stayed in Dawson City. Will DeYoung, a former member of the Silver Seven who left in 1898 after attacking fans, was unable to make the trip due to his duties as an elected official, and Captain Lionel Bennett from Nova Scotia declined to make the trip to be with his wife who had been hit by a runaway sleigh. They set out on December 19, 1904, a few days later than intended due to the federal election. Their first stop was the town of Whitehorse, 530 kilometers away, a distance they traveled in 9 days on foot, bike, and dog sled. They then took a train to Skagway, which was delayed 2 days because of snow, which caused them to miss their boat to Vancouver by 2 hours. They instead waited there for 3 days and caught a steamer ship to Seattle, and a train back north to Vancouver, where they hopped on the 5-day Canadian Pacific train to Ottawa. Before leaving Vancouver, Boyle sent a telegram asking for the series to be delayed since they were running behind schedule. He was denied. They were supposed to have a week to practice before the challenge, but due to the numerous delays, they arrived on January 11th after a journey of more than 6,400 kilometers, and the series started on time on January 13th. They did their best to keep in shape during the trip, jumping rope in a smoking car and sprinting in each station they stopped. They even managed to practice on a tiny rink in Skagway that was half covered in sand which dulled their blades. They were challenging one of the greatest dynasties in Stanley Cup history. The Silver Seven were Cup champs between March 10, 1903 and March 17, 1906, a span of just over 3 years in which they won and successfully defended the Cup 10 times. Their reign started with a 2-game total goal series against the Montreal Victorias, in which they tied the first game 1-1 and won the second game 8-0, and ended with another such series against the Montreal Wanderers, dropping the first game 9-1 before making it close with a 9-3 victory of their own. After the series against the Vics, they won 9 best-of-3 challenges, 2 in 3 games, 6 in 2 games, and 1 by disqualification when the Wanderers refused to continue the series in Ottawa unless the first game, a 5-5 tie in Montreal, was replayed. At 1,103 days, their reign remains the 5th longest in Stanley Cup history, just 2 days shorter than the 4th longest run, the Toronto Maple Leafs from April 22, 1962 to May 1, 1965. The first half of Game 1 was close, coming to an end with Ottawa leading 3-1. It was a physical game that saw Norm Watt and Alf Smith each receive 10 minutes for fighting. Watt would get into it with Art Moore in a second half that saw Ottawa easily pull away from their exhausted counterparts. Watt tripped Moore, who retaliated with a cross-check to the face, after which Watt hit him over the head with his stick, knocking the Ottawa cover point out for 10 minutes. Each would receive 15 penalty minutes for the incident. The final score was 9-2 in a game the Ottawa Evening Journal called a wholesome, even-tempered exhibition. And you think today's games are rough. Despite the loss, the Nuggets still felt good about themselves as they believed many of Ottawa's goals were offside. But in the time between games 1 and 2, Watt made his biggest infraction, claiming Silver Seven star center One-Eyed Frank McGee wasn't as good as his reputation. Well, McGee, who earned his nickname the hard way, losing an eye to a high stick in 1900, made Watt eat his words, setting 2 Stanley Cup records that still stand today. Ottawa demolished the Nuggets in the most lopsided game in Stanley Cup history, 23-2, with McGee scoring 14 of them, including 8 in a row in a 9-minute span. Just for reference, the most goals scored in a 7-game NHL playoff series was 12, when Yari Curry of the Edmonton Oilers scorched the Chicago Blackhawks for 6 games in the 1985 Campbell Conference Final. With this defeat, what was supposed to be a 5-game series was cut short. The crazy thing is, reports say the score would have been even worse were it not for team MVP Albert Forrest in goal, who set a record of his own. No, it wasn't worst goals against average, though let's face it, he probably has that. But at 17, he became the youngest player to ever participate in a Stanley Cup game. After the challenge, they went on to have a rather successful exhibition tournament once Weldie Young rejoined the team. They traveled from Quebec to the Maritimes, down to Pittsburgh, and back up to Manitoba, compiling a 12-10-1 record. Not a terrible trip. After all, the town's name is inscribed on the Stanley Cup as a challenger, and while they may have been on the losing end, they are part of Stanley Cup lore forever. They also proved those from a small mining town in the middle of nowhere could play with those in the East. And as Michael Gates of the Yukon News and Herb Matheson from Up Here magazine point out, losing the Stanley Cup may have been painful for Dawson City, but it could have been the best outcome for hockey. At that time, teams had to visit the home of the current champions in order to challenge for it, and how many would really be crazy enough to take trains, boats, dog sleds, and bicycles 6,400 kilometers just for the chance to win a small silver cup? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit about the history of the Stanley Cup. I certainly had a lot of fun researching it. I want to know though, what do you think is the greatest story in Stanley Cup history? Let me know down in the comments.